Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On I deal with.
Like the rushing of a mighty wind. Like the rushing of a mighty wind.
So I did a video recently where we spoke about the FBA's pressuring the OMB to create new subdivisions within the Black racial category. And we learned that there are certain reasons why the OMB, certain legal reasons why the OMB would object to making those changes. And I just want to revisit those and talk about them and then really get into a little more depth in terms of what the legal case looks like. So here's what ChatGPT said. The moment you distinguish lineage, you implicitly distinguish who suffered historical deprivation versus who immigrated later. OMB normally avoids constructing categories that could become legal claimant classes, especially involving slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and racial wealth transfers. Government lawyers and the White House counsel's office worry about precedent. So I asked, what precedent are government lawyers worried about when it comes to census categories? And it says, there are 3 different types of precedent government lawyers worry about when it comes to census or OMB categories. Number 1, a legal precedent, entitlement and standing. If the census or OMB formally recognizes a group by lineage, that group may gain standing or legal right to sue, claimant status, which is entitlement basis, class definition, which is collective eligibility, and harm continuity, which is a historical injury linkage. The legal profession pays enormous attention to this because it changes from, quote, Black people experience racism, end quote, to, quote, descendants of ex-historical harm are a defined class, end quote. The government never wants to define a claimant class unless it intends to pay, settle with it, or negotiate with it. Same principle as with the Japanese internment reparations, the Holocaust restitution claims, indigenous land claims, and Armenian genocide recognition, foreign policy dimension. Number 2, policy precedent, resource and allocation. If the census recognizes a lineage-based group, new questions arise. Who is entitled to which remedies? This affects affirmative action, minority contracting, educational programs, public health funds, civil rights enforcement, redress programs. Right now, all things are allocated using racial proxies. Lineage categories break that proxy. Number 3, historical precedent, admission of harm. For the U.S. government to formally recognize African American freedmen or U.S. descendants of slavery is to implicitly recognize that slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and New Deal racial exclusion produced multi-generational material damage. Lawyers understand recognition creates historical continuity, injury continuity, beneficiary continuity. Together, these 3 form the legal triad for reparations claims. Why this scares lawyers? Because the moment you define the class, you have implicitly answered who is owed. Right now, ambiguity protects the state. Here's the part most people don't know. The OMB or census system avoided lineage definitions precisely to avoid the Reconstruction era question. Is the freedmen population a distinct people or merely a racial subset? Treating freedmen as a racial subset allows the state to satisfy civil rights with symbolic gestures, race-neutral remedies, diversity hiring, multiculturalism. Recognizing them as a distinct ethno-national group activates the unfinished business of Reconstruction, Freedmen's Bureau mandates, Sherman field orders, land grants, pensions, treaty-like obligations. The one-word lawyers fear most: precedent. Once census does it once, others can demand. Indigenous Black Seminoles, Afro-Mexican groups, Native Hawaiians, Puerto Rican lineage claims, Chicano land claims, Gullah Geechee claims, and precedent applies. The state does not want a reparations spillover regime. Historical analog comparisons. These illustrate why the government hesitates. Japanese internment case, once recognized as a distinct harmed class, it led to restitution plus formal apology plus payments. With indigenous tribes and treaty framework, recognition creates enforceable obligations. Native Hawaiians, unresolved sovereignty claims, recognition leads to sovereignty debates. Census categories look innocent, but they can trigger these frameworks. Obama versus lineage timing. Important connection. Obama-era multicultural pan-Black identity made it easier to avoid lineage. Post-Obama reparations discourse made it harder to avoid lineage. That's why ADOS or FBA lineage politics emerges in 2016 to 2020. Timing is not random. The key takeaway, direct answer: government lawyers fear that lineage-based census categories create the legal, policy, and historical precedents necessary for reparations and redress claims, not just for Black freedmen, but for other harmed groups as well. That's the quiet part that isn't said publicly. So the next question I asked is, do government lawyers believe they will lose the reparations case if they allow FBA desired subdivisions? Or is it the spillover that they fear? And it says, great framing, you're asking the right distinction. The answer is both are feared, but for different reasons, and they are feared at different levels of government. To break it down clearly, Federal Legal Counsel, the White House, DOJ, OMB, this is number one. Their primary fear is a reparations class with legal standing. Because once you define a class, U.S. descendants of slavery or freedmen, you have identifiable class, identifiable harm, identifiable beneficiary pool, and identifiable perpetrator, the U.S. government. That's 4 out of the 5 ingredients of a reparations claim. The 5th ingredient, damages, already exists in the literature, Darity or Hamilton, etc. So yes, DOJ lawyers believe the class is winnable on merits if it ever enters court in a properly scoped form, especially administrative or legislative, not judicial. The government does not want to find out. Number 2, Treasury and budget lawyers. They primarily fear precedent plus fiscal liability. They think in terms of payouts, offsets, interest, beneficiaries, federal program restructuring, intergenerational eligibility. Their nightmare scenario is lineage recognition to class recognition to payout schedule to valuation to implementation. And here's the quiet truth. The U.S. already has reparations valuation models. They're used for other harmed groups, Japanese internment, tribal settlements, 911 victims, etc. Lineage disaggregation plugs freedmen into an existing machine. 3, State Department or national security lawyers. They fear spillover, meaning Caribbean reparations in Europe, African reparations in Europe from Europe and former colonizers, indigenous reparations from U.S. and UN venues, Latin American claims in U.S., Spain, Portugal context, and the global South or colonial powers. They don't care about domestic eligibility. They care about international ripple effects. And here's the key insight. If the U.S. formally recognizes freedmen as a harmed lineage class, it strengthens CARICOM's legal posture against Europe. That pulls the U.S. involuntarily into the global reparations geometry. 4. Political branch lawyers. Congressional lawyers mostly fear fragmentation. If you disaggregate Black America, Congress loses. Or Congress loses a unified civil rights bloc, a unified democratic constituency, a unified policy target. They don't think in terms of quote-unquote winning or losing in court. They think in terms of what happens to coalition math. Which fear is bigger? Here's a surprising part. Treasury plus state fears spillover more. DOJ plus White House counsel fear lineage recognition more. If you force them to choose, spillover is the geopolitical nightmare. Lineage recognition is the domestic constitutional nightmare. The U.S. can pay a bill. It does not want to create a global reparations regime. Do they believe they would lose a reparations case? If judged strictly on law, economics, genealogy, deprivation continuity, state action, then yes, on the merits, Friedman ADOS FBA claims are unusually strong because the state harmed, the harm was continuous, the harm was lineage specific, the harm was federally enforced, the injury is still measurable, the class is still intact, the damages are quantifiable. The weak point is not the legal case. It's standing plus class definition plus venue. Lineage subdivisions on census solve 2 of those. That's why lawyers are hostile. The legal branch fears winning the case. The foreign policy branch fears what winning unleashes globally. The political branch fears what it does to domestic coalitions. 8. The best one-line answer to your question, they fear both. But losing the domestic Friedman case is a bounded consequence. The spillover creates an unbounded system of claims against multiple states. That's the real nightmare. So it did mention that damages were already existed with Darity and Hamilton. So I asked, what are the Darity-Hamilton literature that states those damages? And it says, great question. When people refer to the Darity-Hamilton literature, they're talking about a body of scholarship, papers, and policy work produced primarily by Dr. William A. Darity, Jr. from Duke University, and Dr. Derrick Hamilton, New School, formerly Ohio State. These 2 economists are the central figures in the modern Friedman lineage plus reparations plus wealth gap research space. Let's break down what their work actually covers and why it matters. 1. Core topics they developed or formalized. A. The racial wealth gap. They didn't invent the concept, but they quantified it rigorously, showing median versus mean gaps, household versus individual disparities, inheritance effects, asset versus income dynamics. They argued the wealth gap is not about education, income, financial behavior, or entrepreneurship, but about historical wealth deprivation and federal policy. B. Reparations as an economic program. They built formal models for damages valuation, payment mechanisms, eligibility criteria, class definition. This is crucial because prior reparations discourse was mostly moral, historical, or legal. They made it economic plus technocratic. C. Lineage-based eligibility. They advanced the argument that reparations must be for U.S. descendants of slavery plus Jim Crow, not a racial umbrella. This maps directly onto the later ADOS FBA Friedman lineage movements. D. Critique of bootstraps or behavior narratives. They debunked the idea that more college degrees, higher savings rates, entrepreneurship, marriage rates could close the racial wealth gap. Their line is, wealth begets wealth, history matters. 2. Key papers or books. The most referenced outputs include From Here to Equality by Darity and A. Kristen Mullen in 2020, The Closest Thing to a Modern Reparations Blueprint, Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain, 2015, Darity, Hamilton, Price, Debunks Behavioral Explanations for Disparities, The Racial Wealth Gap, Why Policy Matters, policy paper that reframed Black poverty in structural terms, and What We Get Wrong About Closing the Wealth Gap. This popularized critique of bootstrap logic. There are dozens more academic papers, but those are the heavy hitters. 3. Why their work matters politically. 3 reasons. A. It made reparations technocratic. Once you can quantify harm, reparations shifts from morality to economics to policy. That scares government lawyers, as we discussed earlier. B. It formalized lineage. They argued explicitly that reparations are not for recent Black immigrants, Black diaspora broadly, or pan-Black categories, but for freedmen lineage. This is the economic proof of concept for ADOS or FBA arguments. C. It gives courts and Congress a template. Before them, reparations was abstract. Post them, it has numbers, class definition, historical timeline, and administrative structure. If a judge ever asked, how would this work, they have answers. 4. Connection to our previous discussion. When I said earlier that government lawyers fear the cases strong on the merits, I meant that lineage is defined, the harm is documented, causation is direct, damages are quantifiable, the beneficiary pool is intact, and state responsibility is explicit. Most reparation cases fail because one of those 6 breaks. The Darity-Hamilton literature gives the Freedman case all 6. 5. Connection to ADOS FBA. ADOS in 2016 to 2018 and FBA in 2019 to the present. Lineage politics would not have gained traction without the wealth gap quantification, the lineage framing, the policy infrastructure. They made the intellectual back end. ADOS FBA made the political front end. 6. Why lawyers pay attention. Economists don't win reparations claims, but they arm lawyers with valuation models. Government counsel fear valuation more than slogans. 7. Final answer in one line. The Darity-Hamilton literature is the economic, lineage-based, policy-oriented body of research that turned reparations from a symbolic concept into a quantifiable federal program. I wanted to revisit what ChatGPT said earlier. It said the weak point is not the legal case. It's standing plus class definition plus venue. And that lineage subdivisions on census solve 2 of those. So I asked which one is not solved and how can it be? It says, excellent, you're spotting the mechanics correctly. Let's go line by line and be very precise. The original 3 weak points. For a reparations case or a reparations bill to be functionally actionable, 3 things must be solved. Standing, who has the right to bring the claim, class definition, who the remedy is owed to, and venue, where the claim is adjudicated or implemented, in court, Congress, executive, commission, etc. The OMB subdivisions knock out 2 of the 3, but not all 3. 1. Standing, solved by lineage recognition. Without a lineage category, plaintiffs must rely on racial standing, which SCOTUS hates, or collective cultural identity standing, which is weak. Lineage subdivision solves this because plaintiffs can say, I am a descendant of X harmed class harmed by the United States. Standing becomes genealogical plus historical, not racial plus symbolic. That's the strongest form of standing in reparations law globally. 2. Class definition, solved by lineage recognition. Lineage categories defined who is in, who is out, who is eligible, who is ineligible. This is absolutely essential because governments never negotiate with amorphous claimant groups. If the census creates freedmen or census descendants of slavery, the class definition is achieved automatically. 3. Venue, not solved by census. This is the one that remains unsolved, because even with perfect standing and eligibility, you still need a venue for resolution. There are only 4 venues for reparations in the U.S. context. Venue Type A, judicial, U.S. courts, district, appellate, or SCOTUS. Problems, non-justiciability doctrines, sovereign immunity, time bars or statutes of limitation, political question doctrine, reluctance to adjudicate historical harms. Courts often say, go to Congress, this is not for us. Venue Type B, legislative. Congress passes a reparations bill. This is how Japanese internment reparations, indigenous settlements, 9/11 victim compensation fund all work. Congress is actually the cleanest venue, but also the most political. Venue Type C, executive or commission. Presidential commission plus administrative work. This solves valuation, eligibility, payment mechanisms, genealogical verification, but commissions need legislative power to allocate funds. Venue Type D, international, UN, ICJ, or treaty-based reparations. This almost certainly won't happen for FBA or ADOS because US rejects external jurisdiction. Domestic venue exists in theory, no foreign defendant, but spillover affects this venue indirectly, CARICOM versus Europe. So what's missing? Venue selection and venue authorization. This is why lineage activists talk about policy design, not just recognition. How can venue be solved? 3 paths. Path 1, congressional action, most likely realistic. Congress defines the harmed class, lineage, the responsible party, US, the remedy program, economic, the administering agency, Treasury or similar. The pro is legal closure plus funding authority. And the con of this is partisan plus coalition math. Path 2, commission model, administrative first. The commission determines facts, damages, eligibility, modalities. Congress then adopts. This is the HR 40 model, flawed as written, but structurally sensible. Path 3, court nudging Congress. Courts refuse to adjudicate, but recommend legislative remedy. This has happened in major civil rights cases and indigenous claims. Courts sometimes say, we acknowledge injury in class, but Congress must act. That's a legal green light without judicial administration. Why census alone can't solve venue? Because census doesn't authorize payments, create legal remedies, define responsibility, adjudicate claims, appropriate funds. It only defines class and eligibility parameters. So final answer in one sentence. Lineage subdivisions solve standing plus class definition, but do not solve venue, and without venue, no remedy can move. The next question I asked is, so is HR 40 the best alternative for reparations today? Says the short answer, HR 40 is not the best alternative today. It has the best symbolic vehicle. It was the best symbolic vehicle of the 1980s to 2010s. In the 2020s, it is outdated, structurally insufficient, and strategically weak for lineage-based reparations, as FBA or ADOS thinkers define them. To explain why, you need to understand why HR 40 is and what it isn't, and what would need to replace or modify it. What HR 40 actually does, HR 40 does not pay reparations, determine eligibility, define lineage, allocate funds, determine the harm, determine the remedy, establish a sovereign claimant class, establish a legal venue, or establish damages. It only creates a commission to study and develop proposals. That made sense in 1987 when Conyers introduced it. It makes less sense now because we are not in a knowledge deficit era. 2. Why H.R. 40 worked symbolically in the Obama era. H.R. 40 emerged in an era when reparations was taboo, academic, symbolic, moral, philosophical, not mainstream economics, and not lineage specific. Back then, quote-unquote study first was smart politics because America was not ready to discuss payment. That condition is no longer true. 3. Why H.R. 40 fails in the lineage era, post-2016. ADOS or FBA changed the field by introducing lineage criteria, claimant definition, economic valuation via Darity-Mullen-Hamilton, class-based eligibility, political categorization, genealogical verification, and wealth gap justification. H.R. 40 has none of these elements. H.R. 40 is a racial framework, not a lineage framework. H.R. 40 also contains 3 built-in weaknesses. A. It uses African American as a pan-Black category. This allows Caribbean, African, Afro-Latino, Black immigrant populations to be included in the study pool. That breaks the reparations logic because immigrants were not enslaved in the U.S. and did not suffer Jim Crow or New Deal exclusion. B. It allows non-lineage descendants to sit on commission. A commission could include academics, activists, NGO figures, diaspora figures, immigrant Black elites, who do not represent the claimant class. C. It doesn't bind Congress to implement anything. Even if the commission proposes payments, Congress can ignore it. 5. So what's the best alternative today? Lineage-based economics and policy architects today usually argue for one of 3 models. Model 1, H.R. 40 to H.R. 40 2.0, a lineage fix. Modify H.R. 40 to define lineage as U.S. descendants of slavery plus Jim Crow, tie eligibility to genealogy, exclude post-1965 immigrant lineages, specify descendant class in statute, require specific remedy recommendations, require Congress to vote up or down on proposals. This is the most realistic legislative fix. Model 2, direct reparations bill, skip the commission. Example structure, eligibility defined upfront, payout modality defined upfront, Treasury administers, and Genealogy Bureau verifies. This is the Japanese internment model. This requires more political maturity than Congress currently has. Model 3, dual bill strategy. Bills do 2 separate jobs. 1, Lineage Recognition Act, define the class. 2, Reparations Act, define the remedy. This mirrors how tribal nations resolve sovereignty plus land claims in 2 separate sequences. This model quietly solves the nightmare legal questions. 6. Why H.R. 40 isn't enough now. Because in 2023 to 2026 landscape, we already have lineage literature, valuation literature, historical consensus, economic models, claimant definition, legal theory, political constituency. The bottleneck is venue plus implementation, not study. 7. The key insight. H.R. 40 was built for a world where the question was, should reparations be considered? ADOS FBA Darity built a world where the question is now, what is the mechanism, modality, and eligibility structure? That's why H.R. 40 feels like an artifact of the pre-lineage era. So direct answer to the question, is H.R. 40 the best alternative today? No. It is the best legacy vehicle, not the best modern vehicle. The best modern alternative is lineage definition plus commission plus payment mechanism. In that order. H.R. 40 does none of that sequencing. The last thing I asked ChatGPT to do was to remind me what the political front end that FBA provided was or is. And it says, absolutely. Here's a clean recap of what I meant by the political front end that FBA provided. Think of the modern reparations ecosystem or lineage discourse as having two halves. Back end equals intellectual, economic, genealogical, legal. Front end equals political, discursive, mobilizing, media-facing. Before FBA or ADOS emerged, the back end was built by people like Darity or Hamilton in economics, Mullen in policy, historians and legal scholars, genealogists, lineage researchers. But there was no mass political vehicle to carry that work into public consciousness, media discourse, or electoral politics. That's where FBA and earlier ADOS stepped in. What FBA provided as the front end: 1. Popularization of lineage. They translated descendants of U.S. slavery plus Jim Crow plus Reconstruction into a recognizable political identity. Academics rarely do that. Political movements do. 2. Mass literacy on policy concepts. They turned abstract ideas like lineage eligibility, reparations modalities, federal responsibility, wealth gap causation into digestible political memes, talking points, debates, and demands. That is how niche policy becomes mainstream. 3. Media and narrative disruption. They inserted lineage distinctions into YouTube discourse, Twitter discourse, talk radio, black media, mainstream political interviews. This mattered because before that, pan-black frameworks dominated media by default. 4. Electoral pressure. They were the first group to pressure presidential candidates politically during 2020 primaries on reparations, lineage criteria, black immigrant versus freedman policy distinctions, specificity over symbolism. No movement had ever done that on a national stage before. 5. Demographic identity clarity. They forced a reclarification of black being racial versus African American being ethno-national versus freedmen or ADOS or FBA being lineage. Before 2016 to 2019, these categories were blurred. After 2020, they became common talking points. 6. Exposure of elite substitution. They exposed a phenomenon where black immigrants, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos filled elite roles, media, academia, DEI, originally understood as representing freedmen lineage. This is the first time the substitution problem became widely visible. 7. Coalition splitting. For 50 years, U.S. black political identity functioned as pan-Black, unified, democratic coalition bloc. FBA introduced lineage claims, political specificity, and bargaining power. That is the beginning of interest politics instead of symbolic representation politics. Why the front end was necessary? Because without a front end, economists publish, historians archive, geologists trace, lawyers theorize, but nothing reaches the public sphere, or the electoral sphere, or the media sphere, or the negotiation sphere, and nothing becomes a political demand. Movements turn papers into politics. The bigger insight. In simple terms, Darity or Hamilton built the brain. ADOS and FBA built the mouth. The census or OMB fight is about building the body. Congress would be the hand that signs the check. Each part depends on the others. In one sentence, FBA supplied the mass politics, pressure, identity, and narrative strategy needed to push a lineage-based representations claim out of the academy and into the political arena. But let's go back and recap what we said were the fears that government lawyers have. Long story short, the government lawyers fear FBA delineation because if standing, class definition, and venue are all in place, then there can absolutely be a strong case for reparations given the literature that's out there that explains the damages. And so they'll do whatever they can to prevent all of those from falling into place. FBA subdivisions create standing and class definition. And the venue is the part that really hasn't been worked out yet. So, again, as far as the government lawyers are concerned, they'll do whatever they can to prevent all three of those pillars from materializing. And I think that the legislative venue, which is Congress passing a reparations bill, and which ChatGPT called the cleanest venue, is the most likely venue for this reparations claim, given that all other reparations claim, all successful claims have come through this venue. But that venue is so political that, I think that that's another obstacle that has to be overcome in order for reparations to be successful. So, I think that's enough to talk about for this video. So, as usual, if you liked the video, like the video. If you didn't like the video, like the video. Just hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And you done know. We're gonna catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
Tell the youth them to be strong. You can't tell the youth them for preach wrongs. While you trod it on these lands, just remember every man is equal. Yeah. Each one teach one, and our Father God, him a the only done. So make we ease and reason, smoke trees, span the ends, all the deep meds. Take a look at life, and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen, and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's a government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Yeah, bigger heads no love people again. Them worse than Hitler them. Me see friends now reason again. Vex through whistle a blame. More time it hurt me to see how the face deal with the eagle of them. Regular me see it a pain. Regular me see it a pain. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's a government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Social commentary. Drop the one, your principle, you don't know. The global will come and do it. Some people life every day, it's stress. The high price from JPS, that topic is currently. Jah alone, him a go help you. We need food and we no healthy. We are feel the pain, beg you protect we. In our life we have no envy. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's a government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people.